Chapter 10. Secrets of the Man of Tin. Once my decision was made to strive for knowledge in the secret brotherhoods, events began to pile upon events. When we had finished my last supper with my family and friends, I was admonished to dress myself in my poorest clothes and make certain that I took with me no metal thing whatsoever. I was also forbidden by my beloved father henceforth and forevermore to bind myself with belts of the skin of animals, but only with fibers, or the skin of a sacred serpent, which I alone could kill. I dressed quickly, but not before promptings from my uncle and my beloved masters of the Essenes of Nazar. I embraced my mother, and looked with, longing upon my brothers and sisters whom I loved so very much. Would I see them again? The way was long, the path dark and unexplored, and my life was forfeit to any mistakes. Would I look again upon the bright eyes of my loving family? Even as I puzzled, I was urged along. Outside, I was swept into the parting embraces of the secret master and my teachers. It was the embrace of brotherhood, and it waked a longing in my heart to stay in the safety of my home and my compound. But magnificent horses waited for us. I was mounted and on my way, while the embrace of brotherhood by my father and master was still as warm upon my breast as were the tears on my cheek. But the desert wind both cooled and dried my tears as we galloped over the hills toward the desert in the light of a rising moon. Our pace was fast, and in 2 hours the horses were tired and winded, but then there loomed up a tent and fresh horses, and in less than the time it took us to drink a welcomed broth, our saddles had been changed to even swifter horses. We changed mounts 3 times and sped on under the moonlight. Just at daybreak we changed again, and by sunrise we were on the trail of a rim of low hills and looking down upon the Mediterranean Sea. By midday I was saddle-weary and sleepy, but the pace continued as we crowded time on our move toward the country of Chem. At last we pulled up on hills overlooking Arimathea, a city which had been built by my uncle and his family. It clustered around wharves and sheds in a small cove which made perfect harbor for many ships of cargo and commerce. We rode directly to one of the wharves, and beneath the 2 hours the horses were tired and wind towering bows of the merchant ship Britannin. She was massive. We rode directly to one of the wharves, and beneath the towering bows of the merchant ship Britannin. She was massive. Her high prow and forecastle gave her a look of majesty and seaworthiness that was reassuring to my land-born heart. 2 lofty masts rose out of her great length and reached for the sky, and even as I looked up in awe and wonder, I saw men toiling in the sail ropes and yardarms high above. My uncle did not speak. I thought, therefore, no man aboard knew whence I came nor whither I was go. I was to marvel because of this when subsequent events showed that persons halfway around the world knew and had made preparations. Lines were cast off and the gangplank drawn in before we had taken 20 paces upon the gently swaying deck. A man stopped bellowing orders to those above and on the deck fore and aft, and came toward us. "Captain James of Bruton, this is Jeshua of Nazar. Feed him and let him sleep a while, then make a sailor of him." "Aye, sir. How old are you, boy?" 13. "13, sir," Captain James of Bruton bellowed at me. "Show your respect to your ship's master." I was dimly aware that my uncle walked aft toward the owner's cabin and left me entirely at the mercy of the tempestuous captain. "Respect, sir? Would you have me respect you out of fear or out of love?" I did not see the blow, but I was knocked forward from my feet by a blow on the back of the head. As I lay dazed at the feet of the ship's master, I faintly heard the words that passed. "Who is this smart one, sir?" "Jeshua of Nazar. Take him below and feed him and let him sleep. Then make a sailor of him, Nicodemo." "Aye, sir." Rough hands grabbed my shoulders and heaved me to my feet. My knees would have buckled, but a strong arm grabbed me and slammed me upright against the edge of the forecastle. In a few seconds my thoughts cleared, and I could focus my eyes into those of Nicodemo. His eyes were blue-gray and very bright, and they burned into mine with a strange intensity made of questioning and of commanding. I fought to still my reeling senses, then stood straight. A grim smile came upon the face of Nicodemo as he turned and made his way toward the galley. I followed because of the command in. His gesture. I was fed black bread, boiled barley, and cold-baked fish with leeks and squash. It was a rough fare, but I was hungry beyond belief. Yet I could hardly eat what was placed before me, so sleepy did I become as soon as my stomach was filled. A youngster came for me and took me down into the musty hold of the ship. I was handed a dirty blanket and shown a stretch of deck upon which no man had left his blanket. This was to be my bed. I lay down, fully intending to weep for myself and my foolish decision to risk all I had gained for some unknown goal. I could not weep. My head hurt, and the deck was hard. Yet somehow I knew this, even all this, led toward my final goal. Somehow this was part of my training in that mysterious Great White Brotherhood and in the ancient and sacred order of Melchizedek. I drifted into sleep even with the exciting calls which controlled the running feet that pounded above my head. A moment later it seemed Nicodemo stood over me, shaking me severely. It was brutal when compared to the gentle persuasion of my mother, and anger flared within me. I was awake enough to stumble after him to the deck of the gently swaying ship. The gentle breeze kissed my face with dawn's freshness, and I realized that I had slept through the night and it was now daybreak. How beautiful was the scene! The blue Mediterranean held the Britannian like an airy fleck of foam in a huge blue cup. The weaving water seemed to curve upward toward the horizon on all sides, and from the east a ray of sunlight rolled a ruby carpet into the azure water. The ship was a strange thing, powered by the breeze that slanted across our bow and filled the immense sails like happy cheeks of hurrying squirrels. There was the indescribable and lonely call of gulls floating aft the stern, and the rhythmic lapping of waves upon the hull. High above, like the teased strings of a muted lute, sail ropes made loving sounds to the kissing wind. Embracing all was the salt, clean fragrance of the gently running sea. We passed the mid-deck and went up to the raised aft deck and still further up to the tiller deck. From there we could look down across the decks of the ship, even out across the bow toward the horizon. There is a rope and a cask for lifting water. There are stones for scrubbing. Scrub this deck, then report to me at the tiller. I soon had lifted several casks of water, washed the deck, and rubbed its scarred surface with the heavy stones. Aching in every joint, I walked proudly to Nicodemo. I have scrubbed the entire deck, sir. Good. Now scrub it twice more. Again I hoisted the heavy casks and washed the deck and scrubbed it hard with the heavy white stones. Carefully I did it twice. Then I reported the fact to Nicodemo, who was standing beside the tiller arm looking at me with hard eyes. Go below and bring me food. When you have eaten, scrub this deck 3 times more. 3 times more I lifted the heavy casks, flushed the deck, and scrubbed it with the heavy stones. When I had finished, I could hardly rise from the deck, so cramped were my muscles, so tired my body. But I started all over again and scrubbed it, for the 7th time. I then carefully sloshed the deck with clear salt water and put the stones back in the holding racks. Then only did I limp toward my hard-eyed tormentor. I washed the deck a 7th time, sir. Why? To please you, sir. The blow caught me on the side of the head and sent me reeling a 6 paces. To please me? Boy, have you learned nothing in this day of drudgery? You do not work to please me. You work to carry out my order, and that only. It may not please me to give the order, nor you to execute it. You do exactly as you are ordered, and you do that only. Is that clear? I nodded dumbly. Good. Now scrub that deck again, then go below for food, then find me wherever I may be. I will show you how to tie a few knots, at least enough to hang yourself. For the 8th time I scrubbed the deck. At last I stored the stones away and, holding to the rail, kept my aching legs from buckling until I could walk on them again. Painfully I crept down for food and was cursed by the galley man for coming so tardily. Grudgingly he fed me, skimping on portions and grumbling all the while. I ate swiftly, finding no joy in the loneliness of the meal and no pleasure in the taste of the stingily served food. I climbed the ladder to the deck, the tasteless food knotted in my stomach and sticking in my gullet. What manner of life was this? Fury was in every man, a subtle hatred of all things, even himself. Only one thing was respected, the order of the ship's master. Yet it seemed that even against this structuring of behavior there was grumbling. No man loved any other. There was no joyous cooperation in the doing of work, but each man was an island of resentment unto himself. Why? Why would men live without brotherhood and love? I leaned against the rail of the Britannian and looked out toward the lip of the cup of my world. The sea was a brassy color under the fury of the Mediterranean high-noon sun. No cooling breeze stirred in the lines above, and the sails hardly filled but flapped a little, as if loath to do their work. Nicodemo was found at last, sitting on the deck in the shadow of the jib sail, as far forward as one could go in the bow of the ship. Beyond him was the bowsprit and the two-faced carving of a god holding a new cut, sprig of all heel in an apron of gold. We spent the broiling afternoon, learning to tie knots and make them tight, until my fingers were as sore as my back, and my head was aching from the endless raps I suffered from Nicodemo's backhand and knuckles. For each time I made a slip or an error, I was cuffed. "Boy, think, keep your mind on the knot, your very life depends upon it." How can I concentrate in my fear? In moments of terror, you must be able to bring all your faculties to one point. How can I concentrate in my fear? In moments of terror, you must be able to bring all your faculties to one point. Your eternal life depends upon it. Time after time, hour after hour, I tied whatever knot I was commanded, until I could do so even when the punishing knuckles were hovering above my head. When at last I had tied the 37 knots each 7 times at great speed and without error, I felt pleased with myself. But Nicodemo merely grunted and said, "Go eat, then to rest. In 4 hours you go on the tiller crew." I turned away with still some pride in my accomplishment, but the snarling voice stopped me short. "Boy, you'll never make a sailor. You are stupid and you are awkward." I fought down the collar that rose in my spine and made the nape of my neck bristle with my fury. I held his bitter eyes with my own for a dozen heartbeats, then turned away, but his voice cut again like a lash across my back. "Besides, you are a weakling. You have neither endurance nor strength." Before I could take another step, his voice struck me again. "You are a physical coward." When I was slapped awake, the Britannian was yawing and pitching in the running troughs of a rising sea. Still the sails hung almost limp, and no breeze stirred the sultry anger of the night. I was hurried to the tiller deck and placed opposite an enormous Egyptian sailor, whose name was as ugly as his constant mood, Skakus. In the running sea it was our job to hold the tiller wherever we were directed by Nicodemo. When the movement was to be to the starboard, I was to push. When to the port, Skakus was to push. With the ship sloughing into the quartering troughs, we were constantly having to correct her sluggish progress. The huge tiller handle pressed hard upon our straining arms at all times. We could not rest for an instant. Skakus, too, was inclined to meanness. When he could do so, he let go the tiller handle so that it would slap at me with the crushing force of an onrushing wave, bruising my chest and arms, and staggering me before I could regain my footing. Within a very few minutes I was bruised and aching, and sweat was streaming from me. Across the tiller handle, Skakus grinned at me in merciless mirth, staring down from his enormous bulk and height like a devil from Mount Olympus. He stank with a swinish sweat, and with an oil that was worked into his hair, and with the foul breath of one who craved and drank too much Roman grog. When at last the bruising trick was over, I stumbled toward the galley for food and then hurried toward my blanket to lie down. As I passed the waist deck, 4 powerful forms blocked my path. I tried to step around them, but they cornered me. I tried to cry out. A calloused hand was clapped over my mouth, and my arms pinned to my back. I tried to kick, my feet were swept from under me, and I was slammed against the rails so violently that my senses spun. Put him in skull. It was Skakus, and his voice rasped with anticipation. "Let him kill himself or learn to handle boat. Otherwise he'd kill us all." A moment later, I felt the narrow skull being lowered with me in it, and we hit the water with a wave-breaking splash. The skull danced into the waves with a drunkard's lurch, throwing me against the side of the Britannian. Before I could cling, a contrary wave caught the light boat, and I was rolled to the other side. The huge bulk of the Britannian slid away from me. I was caught in the full force of a hard-running sea. The skull sloughed wildly under me and began to settle crosswise to seas. I realized that I might be rolled over and grabbed for the sculling oar. I fought desperately to right the boat and head it into the rough sea troughs. When this was done, I thought to cry out, but the Britannian was a dozen rods away. I fought hard to control the tricky skull and to row it toward the Britannian. But precious minutes were wasted while I tried to learn the trick of steering the slender boat while rowing it. At last I learned, after waves had swept me with spume and wetted me with spray. Then slowly I began to close the distance between me and the ship. I fought and strained until the breath came hard in my dry throat, and realized that my strength would never last for that desperate run. I almost collapsed for a few seconds, rowing only enough to keep the bow pointed into the waves. Then, rested a little from the fury of the strain, I began to row moderately. I set a pace I could hold for hours, and continued to row with a dogged but space-consuming stroke. With agonizing slowness, I gained on the ship until at last I was within 2 scull lengths of the stern. I could see the white wake made by the rudder as the tiller was pushed about far above, but I could not approach closer, for the sudden flash of that wide rudder would crush the shell of my light scull like eggshell. I had been let off on the starboard and hoped to find lines dangling there, so I forced the skittish little shell into the outboiling wake of the ship and drove hard to cross the troubled water. A swift running wave slammed into the bow of the scull and spun me about. Instantly the wake slammed into the stern and spun me back again. For a moment I thought the scull would tip, but it righted itself and nosed into the relatively sheltered water beside the big ship. I rowed cautiously now, making little noise, but shivering with the eagerness of my hope that the lines would be dangling to the water. I found a line trailing in the water. To this I fixed the bow of the scull and tested to see if the little craft would pull. It did so, and I decided to climb the line and then pull the craft up. I had not gone halfway up the line before the scull, whipping about without my weight, began to pound the hull of the Britannian with each and every wave. The racket was enough to wake any man on the ship. I climbed frantically to get above the rail. I had just dropped to the deck when the entire ship's crew seemed to converge around me, led by a swearing and angry Nicodemo. While he glowered at me, the scull again crashed against the side of the ship, and the sound was like that of a huge drum. I backed away from the rail and then stepped forward and began to pull the line until the scull was lifted from the water. Straining against the weight, I brought the boat up until it could be lifted aboard the ship. Only then did I turn to face the waiting mate. "Who gave you permission to go over the side?" "No one, sir." "Why did you go?" "I don't know, sir. If you were put over, it will mean 20 lashes for every man until we find the culprit for 100 lashes. If you went of your own free will, God help you from the master's wrath. Speak, boy. Were you put over, or did you break the master's law?" Skakus stood in the front ranks of the crowded sailors. In the skylight, I could see plainly the animal fear upon his snarling face. Could I tell? Should I tell? Should I make certain that the law of the ship punished those who had recklessly risked my life in the high-running sea? I knew I would not do so, no matter what punishment might be in store for me. I was not accustomed to this brutal world, and I could not understand a world that was moved by fear and hatred rather than love. But I had not sunk so low that I could not show love and compassion. I bit my trembling lip and said nothing. "Your answer, boy." "What shall I answer, sir?" "The truth, boy. I felt the tension in every sailor aboard the ship who was near to me. The tension so intense that they seemed to forget to breathe." "The truth, sir? When I went over the side, I did not know it was against the order of the master." "Is that all you have to say, boy?" "You asked for the truth, sir." The blow struck my head and smashed me against the railing. My senses spun, but I did not fall. "For your insolence you shall be stern-hauled for quarter of a watch. Skakus, Dobbin, Romulus, rig a line and stern-haul, but let him tie the knots, and if one fails, let him drown. Hurry, hurry." A line was slapped against my chest and then passed around my waist. Despite the urging of a dozen voices to speed, I concentrated only upon the knot and tied a bowline saddle around my legs and then around my upper chest close under the arms. Each knot was worth my very life, and I tied it well and tested it thoroughly before going to the next, despite the urging to speed. Then I was picked up by the sailors and rushed sternward. There the line was measured so that I would trail 50 feet behind the ship, and I was hurled outward into the dark sea. I turned slowly in the air and fought to strike the water feet first, and was only partly successful. The air was knocked from me, and I sank into a seemingly endless sea. I fought myself to the surface, and had just managed to gasp a breath when the line tugged me backward and forced me under again. I fought the water until I had oriented myself to the pull of the rope. Then I pulled upon the rope to bring my head above water. I had time for a fast breath before the next wave slammed me under again. I realized in sheer panic that if each wave broke over me, I could never last a quarter of a watch. I could not last out 10 such punishing onslaughts of twisting, crushing water. The panic gripped me, and I felt myself grow stiff with fear. There seemed to burst from the center of my heart a small blue-white flame. It moved to the center of my chest and darted upward with spear-like thrust that burst with a golden brilliance into the chambers of my brain. It was as if I could see myself in the water, being dragged by the merciless line through a torturing sea. But I also was conscious of the fact that my stiff body was now pliable and warm. My mind and muscles were not frozen with fear. Instead, I felt the wisdom of 1,000 and the strength of 10,000s. Slowly, I began to swim until I was guiding myself over the waves and, letting myself sink into the less punishing troughs. For a few minutes I fought all the time. Then I realized that I could coast down into the troughs and needed to work only as the wave was coming toward its crest. Then a few powerful strokes would lift me over the wave and make it possible to coast for several restful seconds. A great joy came over me, a joy of self-dependence and personal worth. It was with grim inner triumph that I saw the sun at last tip the hills of the waves with gold and spread a path into the murky, rebellious water. I had conquered my fears, but more, I had conquered my own self. I had made my fear-drained body function to a higher level than it normally could. When I was hauled up to the stern deck, the grim-faced sailors eyed me with enmity, and Nicodemo stood straddle-legged looking at me with contempt-sharpened eyes. Without a word, he turned and left, and I was roughly shoved toward the galley where I sat shivering and drinking pots of hot water sweetened with honey. At last I began to warm up and was given food before I went to my blanket to sleep. As soon as my hair hit the blanket, I was asleep. How long I slept I do not know, for I fell into one of my strange periods of complete exhaustion. I awakened to the sickening realization that the deck of the Britannian had dropped away, and I was sliding across the planking. A moment later I skidded into the side of the hull with a frightful force. Before I could come out of my daze, the deck of the ship twisted about underneath me, and then dropped away in the opposite direction. I slid across the deck, whirling slowly, and crashed again into the inside of the hull. This time I caught hold of a stave post, and when the ship lurched again, I held on until I could regain my sense of direction and balance. I pulled myself up and held to the clamp rail and slowly became aware of the sounds out on the weather decks. Feet were pounding and voices calling, but they were dim and faded into the howling fury of a storm. The lines snarled as the wind slapped them about. The companionway seemed beyond reach as I clung to the clamp rail and tried to walk toward it. The ship twisted and turned like a living thing under intolerable torture. It rolled so far that it was impossible to stand on the slanting deck, and I was almost torn from the clamp rail. The ship then crashed into a wave with a violent shudder that sent squeals of protest through every beam and brace. Yet even as it squealed in agony, it rose to attack again the oncoming walls of water. I was jarred and battered in trying to hold to my feet. At the top of the companionway, I found that the hatch was battened down, and I could not raise it. Even with my shoulder against the wood, I could feel the water pounding against the frame. I braced myself against the hatch, wedged between stair rung and hatch cover, and waited. It seemed hours before there was any change in the squealing of the timbers. Then it grew worse, but suddenly the battened hatch gave to the pressure of my shoulder. I waited until the tremendous force of a wave had roared over it and sprang out with all the speed my cramped, sore muscles would permit. The hatch was hardly back in place when the wind snatched at me, followed a moment later by the whiplash of a wall of water that broke over the bow. I was slammed to the deck, but clung to the underside of the hatch until the brutal wave let me go. Then I scrambled to my feet and grabbed for a better hold on the hatch. In the half-light of early dawn, I looked about upon the utter destruction of the upper part of the ship. Broken lines hung from splintered yard arms, howling in the wind and lashing their wet lengths across the waist deck of the Britannian. Not a sail was still intact, but tatters fluttered from every rope and every davit. I waited for a passing wave, then lunged across the deck and grasped the rope-whipped forward mast. There, lashed in the network of ropes, was Skakus and Dobbin, clinging for life in the hard-running wind, and bleeding around the head and shoulders from the lashing blows. From the wet ropes, I clung while a wave broke over me. And when the water drew back to strike again, Skakus yelled, "Tie yourself, you'll go over!" What happened? His answer was stopped by a roaring wall of water. When it was gone, he roared above the waves, the wind, and the groaning ship. Cyclone struck without warning. No one can move. Tie yourself. I began to tie myself, then stopped. Something urged me forward, something compelled me to go toward the bow of the ship. I ran between waves to the ladder leading from the waist deck to the forward deck. 7 times I clung to the rail or a clamp rail before I could force my way forward toward the bow of the ship. The bow was rising and then sinking. thrusting itself underwater for seconds at a time, and it was clear that danger lay ahead, but I could not turn back. I inched along until at last I saw why I had come. There, pressed against the bulkhead, was Nicodemo, held by a spar and part of the top mast, broken and splintered, but bound together in the form of a cross. He was only dimly conscious. Each time the wave rolled by and the bow of the ship climbed toward the sky, I could see that he struggled against the weight of the cross. He was too weak to lift it. I had to be careful, for if I unpinned him at the wrong time, he would be washed overboard. Before I touched the spar or the mast, I rigged a line around the rail and tied it under his arms and legs in a saddle. Then I got down beside him and waited for a wave to break. Together we struggled to raise the crossed timbers and were helped by the onrushing wave. The cross was tipped upward, stood for a moment as an ominous shadow over our bodies, then tumbled backward into the raging sea. I clung helplessly to the rail until the wave had passed. Then I inched Nicodemo along the deck, passing the rope that lashed him from place to place along the rail stanchions. At long last I had drawn him down to the companionway and to the waist deck of the ship. But my strength was failing. The battle in wind and wave had lasted over an hour, and exhaustion was making me stupid and slow. I suddenly felt flash over me a roaring fury at the needless destruction of the good ship Britannin. I straightened up, and holding to the companionway rail, took a wave full in the chest. A great exhilaration rose up, and I commanded, "The storm to be gone." Over and over I yelled until my voice was hoarse. Then suddenly the ship lashed into the sea and did not lurch upward with its normal violence. Within a few moments the waves had rolled beyond us. The wind had died to a gentle zephyr, and the Britannin drifted in a quiet sea. Nicodemo half stood and half hung to the rail of the companionway, looking at me with inscrutable eyes. Behind me I heard the slow, bone-weary tread of Skakos and Dobbin. Soon the sailors began to appear from the stations where they had been caught by the sudden fury of the unexpected storm. Untying Nicodemo, I carried him toward the officer's cabin, guiding the listless movement of his feet until I could put him down upon his cot. He sighed and stared at me from over bright eyes, but said nothing, not even a thank you, for his life. Certainly there had been no thought in my mind of heroics in what I had done, but I did not expect the results that followed. The sailors refused to work a watch with me, and were driven to it because of fear of the master of the ship. They blamed me in whispers for the sudden storm, and soon they were hissing at me when we passed on deck. "Jonah, you devil's mate!" Within 3 days we had cleared most of the debris from the deck of the ship, and had new sails and lines upon temporary masts and spars. We kept on running in a northwesterly direction, passed through a narrow gate between Africa and Galicia, and ran on northward. Many days later we came in sight of a low-lying headland, and the lookout sang loudly, "Lands! End ahead, sir, straight on the beam." We sailed westerly around this cape, and then turned northeasterly. By nightfall we were past Trevose Head, and in the night the sailors grumbled because we were sailing in narrow straits between Deer Country Point and Lundy Island. Before morning all hands were rousted out to shorten sail, and at daylight we nosed in toward an apparently impassable marshland. As we came close to shore, I saw that there were many broad channels weaving like silvery coils into the lowlands. As we eased around the wide turns, pushed by a persistent breeze, the way was sometimes so narrow that we could have stoned the land far below our bow and not over 18 inches above the water of high tide. All day we moved inward until an hour before sunset the lookout called, "The Mendip Hills, sir." A look of pleasure came to the face of Skakos and Dobbin. They spoke at once, each saying apparently the same thing. "Yinnis written," Dobbin said. "Glastonbury," Skakos said. Then he added, "Look you, the mouth of the brew." There, coming down toward us, was a ship exactly like the Britannin. As we came into the mouth of the river, it came out into the slough called Mirpool or Sea Basin. In that near sunset passing began something surpassing strange in my life. Golden light, strong and strange, came from a bank of golden clouds and was mirrored in the waters of the river. The air was fused into a pink glow, welding water, earth, and sky into one magnificent totality. Our sister ship passed almost in boarding distance of our starboard, and on her decks was a scene of great beauty. When first I beheld it, my body was melded and fused with a sweet music that never could completely die for all the rest of my life. On a golden rug in the center of a square made of purple velvet ropes supported on stanchions sat a small and beautiful young woman. She was dressed in a simple garment of shimmering green, and around her shoulders was a fleecy cloak of purple and gold, iridescent in the golden light. All the richness of ornament and trapping was as nothing compared to the girl herself. She was pure beauty. Her oval face was fairer by far than my mother's face. The crown of gold upon her head was so light it was almost silvery. 2 braids hung down across her shoulders, the golden-colored hair ending in fillets of pure gold upon which there had been set large jade scarabs of lustrous green. I stood at my watch on the tiller deck and could see her clearly on the deck of the owner's cabin of our sister ship. As I looked at her, my body was suddenly rigid. Longing for her seemed to swell inside my heart. I seemed to leap across the gap and kiss her lovely cheek in utter adoration and deep love. She seemed to me to be all that woman ever was or could ever be. She was my mother, my sweet sisters, my aunts, and all lovely women I had known, and yet she was more. A rising tide of delight in my physical body made strange music upon the strings of my being. In response to this new stirring, I kissed her again, not in reverence and adoration upon the cheek, but in manly vigor upon the ruby heart-formed lips that smiled at me from beneath her jade-green eyes. I kissed her with all the passions of the world of a lonely man, and I saw from her looks that she knew I had done so and was pleased. In an instant I was back in my body, and the ships were passing almost silently on the still waters of the River Brue. Yet I knew that a thing of great importance had happened to me. Even as I stood in the rags of a sailor, dirty and tired, I was suddenly purely clean, vitally alive, and vibrant in every cell. I was aware of my emerging manhood and pleased with it, far more pleased with it than I thought my mentors would approve. Yet I knew that there was also a spiritual and endless pull from my inner being to this silent, beautiful, guarded, and smiling girl. Even when the ships had moved apart and she was lost in the distance, I could still feel her. I could even see her. It was as if every cell of my being had been stamped with a cameo of her beauty and her warmth. Somewhere, from the distant hill beyond the landing pier of Glastonbury, a Somerset robin sang to the end of the day, and its notes floated on the air like a song in a sweet dream. From that time on, I was not to hear the song of a robin, but that I saw again the vision of eternal and feminine grace. Never, never, I was sure, had there been such beauty. I would have stayed lost in my dreaming of her but for the landing call. The great ship became a battleground of feet, running to bring us safely into the wharf. When the big ship had been made fast, hundreds of local Cornishmen began to come aboard and carry away the cargo to the markets of the borough and to other towns and markets throughout Somerset and the Salisbury Plains. Most of the sailors were given permission to leave the ship, and I was ordered to go with them. Not one would walk with me, but I was close packed between them, and by listening learned much. This series of sluices was in fact a sluggish lake in the Somersetshire lowlands. To it and the area was applied the name Mere Pool. The lake of many arms fed from the River Brue into the sea, and at the Sweetwater line on this tidal river was the village called Ynis Written. Some called it the Crystal City, still others Glastonbury or Fort of Glass. One called the entire tillage and the sweeping countryside, from Salisbury Plains to Mendip Hills, the house of God. On hearing this, my flesh became suddenly alive. What did these ruffian sailors know of the house of God? Was not this what we called the inner and sacred part of our brotherhood of the Essenes? Why then should this strange place be so named? We trudged along the quay, past the friendly and smiling fair-haired people of the village who were on the river fishing, and went far along the river before we turned suddenly inward toward the hills and began to climb the edge of a strangely abrupt hill. We had not gone far before we all stopped and sat down to rest. Nicodemo came near to me, still limping a little, and he sat down heavily. "Aye," he said to no one in particular, "this is named rightly the Weary All Hill. We are weary all." When we rose to go, I stopped in amazement. Two things came to my view. First of all, Ynis Written was on the lakeside of an island, which was clasped in two arms of the wide, slow river. Second, the rising ground beyond Weary All Hill was like a man-made mound, a pyramid of enormous size with the top truncated over a large acreage. From where we had rested, we could see the trails that laced the sides of this apparently man-designed mountain. I pressed forward eagerly, my curiosity pulling my tired legs. Before we reached the first of the lacing trails, Nicodemo turned and snarled at me. "Boy, upon this mountain is a sailor's rest. Only sailors may stay there. Look, across this vale, that branch of the Brew, and upon yonder swale you see the giant oak. Go there, build yourself a hut in which to rest yourself, and wait without fail until we come for you. Do you hear, boy?" "Yes, sir." I way-tunned from the well-trodden path toward the distant oak which loomed big in the swale 1,000 paces long. I made my way down into the verdant valley, waded across the sparkling arm of the river Brew, and drank my fill of its purling sweet water. Then I trudged disconsolately toward the towering oak, knowing in my heart the misery of failure and the torture of loneliness. Painful was the thought that my uncle had deserted me. He had left me in the hands of a ruffian crew, had not even spoken to me when the long trip was over, for this had I given up my master's jewel. I climbed the low swale to the oak and sat down in its spreading shadow near the expansive trunk. I was tired, and it was only 1 night and a quarter day since we had tied up at my uncle's wharf, but I could not continue to sit. I had been told to build a hut in which to rest myself, and to wait until someone came for me. What had I learned upon the Britannian but that obedience was the first law of my new world? I looked for material, but there was none. At last I saw, growing in the branch of the Brew, very tall reeds. They were pulpy and strong, but pliable. I gathered them in by the armful and trudged with them up to a spot about 40 paces from the enormous oak. There, toiling without food in the midday sun, I began to build a small hut by weaving the reeds together after burying the butt ends deep in the ground to hold in place against the wind. When the almost watertight skeleton was finished, I brought long leaves of a watercourse and wove them from the top downward so that they would shed the dew and rain. Then, through a hole I had left in the top, I wove longer reeds together to form a cupola, open to the passage of smoke and air, but proof against rain. When I had finished, the sun was setting and I was hungry, but I was also proud of my rude hut, made of my own skill and my own hands. I left my blanket and pack inside the hut and hurried down to the branch of the river Brew. There I found water succulents aplenty, and trees of wild fruits and vines of sweet berries. Hurriedly I wove a large basket of small reeds and filled it with food for the next day. In the growing darkness I made my way toward my home of reeds. The gathering darkness made me lonely. I found 3 stones to serve as a hearth and hunted for dry limbs to make a fire to cheer me. I let tears flow down my cheeks for pity of my own loneliness and my rude surroundings, but as I looked into the flames leaping from my own hearth, saw the bulging basket of food, and felt the warmth of my own home, my pity was dried up. Then in the flames I saw again the golden girl upon the rug of gold, and again in my longing and adoration I kissed her ruby lips, and she was pleased. As the days came one upon the other, I laid in stores against the cold ahead, gathered nuts and acorns, brought up cords of wood, and did all things to protect myself and my home. At first I longed for companionship, but as days turned to weeks, I almost began to dread the thought of someone coming for me to take me from this paradise into the beastly ship. If my uncle had in truth deserted me, I came to thank him for it. My only concern was that I did not seem to be progressing toward my promised goal of knowledge about the White Brotherhood and the Order of Melchizedek. Each night, each morning, and each noon I prayed that I might continue on the road of service to my fellow men. Thus, truly I say to you, did I continue for 20 weeks by my reckoning, and no man spoke to me, and I to no man, but I had grown beyond fear, beyond loneliness, beyond criticism of myself or my fellow men. I had turned inward to the resources my own heart devised, of which contemplation and meditation were chief, but envisioning the golden girl was sweetest. Each day at sunset I placed a palm-sized stone upon a walkway that was eventually to curve from my doorway to the towering oak, for this was my calendar by which I reckoned the days. I had placed the 147th stone the night before, when at sunrise I heard the music of pipes and drums coming from beyond the oak. I ran to its giant trunk. There was no person in the entire swale, yet the music and cadence were growing ever louder. I stood in utter delight at its beauty, but in complete bewilderment as to its source. Then, even as I looked, the earth beyond the oak began to rise, and it folded back on all 4 sides until there was an opening like that of a cistern or a well, flanked with giant stones of granite. Then, out of the mouth of the cistern marched in perfect order and rhythm the magnificent sight of a body of druids. First there came the heralds and guides, glorious in yellow robes and ruby supertunicas. Second came the lesser priests in the grades of Eubates, in saffron and green. Then came the body of the priests of the grades of bards, in simple tunics of many colors, like those worn by men of travel, and each priest carried a lute, or had the symbol of a lute embroidered upon his overtunic or upon his cape. Then came the mighty druids. Even in the way they walked there was recognized majesty and might. They moved in, conscious union, a masterly brotherhood, like soldiers of the spirit who had conquered all foes. Each was kingly in his tunic of white and blue, with his robe of green and blue, and his cape of purple velvet. Upon the head of each was placed the jewel-encrusted cap of blood-red color. Last came the archdruid and his 12 chief druids. They were most resplendent in tunics of white or green, as the grade might indicate, and cloaks of royal purple velvet. The procession circled round, and in circling ranks surrounded the mighty oak against which I leaned for my legs, had grown too weak to hold my excited heart. Then, at a signal from the staff of a chief druid, all sounds stopped, and all knelt upon the grass of the swale, circling round me. I knelt too, for I knew they merely worshipped the highest God, whom they adored more intensely by praying before the largest oak in a grove. When the prayers and the ceremony had been said, the assembly rose, and the sound of piping and drums fed them back into the mouth of the cistern. Nothing was said to me, neither hello nor goodbye, not even a stand aside, you distract our worship. No eye recognized me, no face lighted in greeting. It was as if I did not exist for them. How can I say how great was my longing to be with and of them? My heart was at first full with hope and gratitude that they had come for me, but as they disappeared into the stones of the cistern, my heart grew empty as a crushed acorn cup. When they had closed down the stones and I stood upon the sun-flooded swale near the giant oak, I felt the tears upon my cheek. After a short time I turned to contemplation, realized that it was neither bad nor good that I was thus forgotten, and I managed to become indifferent to my future. Near midday there came an old one across the swale, wrapped in a brown cloak with a large brown hood that put the face in deep shadows. Out of that cavern of black came a voice weak and quavery enough to go with the bent back, hobbling gait and large staff. "Young man, I thought I saw those cursed druids. Were they here?" "Old one, I cannot say yes. Druids were here, but I do not know they are cursed." "Aye, cursed, fair lad, know you not that hereabouts is Blood Spring?" "Blood Spring? Blood Spring! It is so named because they lure young hopefuls into the maw of that bloody cistern for sacrifice to red-chopped Hu, their god, and the blood-stained goddess Saradwin. Hear me, fair lad, many go in as men, but I give you my word I have never seen a man return." The bent one hobbled away, muttering querulously against the druids and their human sacrifice, and climbed back up the swale and over the lip of the hill. On the sinister warning I had much time to ponder, for the day was slow until sunset, when I placed the 148th stone and sat at my lonely meal before going to my pallet of rushes. Contemplation upon the meaning of the things that had happened to me, and meditation upon the spirit of man, soon gave way to the daily kiss of my beloved golden girl, and then deep sleep. I was roused by the thin, plaintive nining of a sad tune. I listened to the sad song almost as one who dreams. It approached my hut, and I rose and went out into the night. Far across the swale came a single piper and a chief druid. They paused to pray before the oak, then came toward my hut, and they were lighted by a single taper. When at last they stopped before me, the piping died in a crying mood, and the chief druid spoke. "Boy, Joseph of Arimathea, holder of 12 hides of lands around this vale of Avalon, bespeaks your desire to risk your life in our initiations. Say you ought for your own interests? I want to know that which is needful to my destiny, sir. Will you risk your life? Will you sacrifice yourself?" "I will risk my life, but hope to cling to it." "Hear well, boy, many do not live. Through the ordeal of our initiation, upon your decision hangs your life. Will you come into Blood Spring, or will you stay upon this island?" He did not wait for my reply, but turned away, and to the plaintive piping marched thrice around the oak. I stood in indecision for the first circuit. Then I sprang into action and gathered my bundle and my blanket. I cast out the fruits and berries that would quickly spoil, and covered with baskets the stores of nuts that would last a while. Before the third circuit was complete, I stood beside the oak, waiting for the ceremonial circuits to be ended, Without another word, they went into the mouth of the cistern called Blood Spring, and I followed them. The stones closed behind us by what means I did not know, and we were in a wide tunnel which was lined with rough stones. We made our way swiftly now to the Happy Pipe and circled toward the mound beyond Weary All Hill. At last we climbed stairs, came out upon a trail on the side of that hill, made our way swiftly over the crest of the hill and into a monastery of great size. In the inner court I was left with many others who squatted on the stones. All were older than I. Many seemed frightened or uneasy, or excited and overeager. My greatest effort was to be calm and detached, but I now know that some of the morning dew I brushed from my face was distilled out of the sighs of leaving my rude hut near the great oak in the Vale of Avalon. Before long there came a half-dozen chief druids, each the master of one of the training and initiation centers round the countryside. All those waiting in the courtyard were placed in ranks, instructed to keep perfect time to the pipe and the drum sent with them, and to follow the chief druid at whatever pace he should set. We went our several directions. I was in the group of about 70 candidates who were turned toward Cornbray, the village of the Three Perfect Hills. We started at a leisurely pace, the drum beating its cadence. Slowly we increased our tempo until we were moving rapidly through darkness on the uneven trails. I put all discomfort from the jarring and uneven ground out of my mind and fled into the darkness, following the perfect rhythm of that commanding and guiding drum. We walked for 3 hours without stopping. After a short rest, we continued on through the night, past daybreak and into the morning. At last the drum ceased, and we sagged on our weary feet to look up from the Salisbury plain at the magnificence of Cornbray. It was a veritable paradise of beauty, stretching some hours' walk in each direction and designed to bejewel the 3 perfect mountains around which it was grouped. We then were raced into its walls, and there within that very hour began our studies of every science known to man. My 13th, 14th, and 15th years were spent there in daily studies and recitations that lasted from well before dawn of a summer's day to well past dark. We were regimented, hurried, bullied, confused, and ever guided to new tasks and new learnings as fast as we mastered the first assigned. We were also busy daily with hours of work in the nearby fields, to which we ran in step to the endless and unfailing drum. We were taught the use of the long sword, the short sword, the cuirass, and the bow, always to the rhythm of the unfailing drum. We were stripped to loincloths and taught to battle with the hands, and shown ways to maim and to kill. So rough were the assignments that many fell by the way. A few died of overexertion. At night we were shut up in small cages of stone not much larger than a pace by 3 paces, and some men went mad from the confinement. I was lucky, for I had been trained in arduous tasks in the Essene Brotherhood and was accustomed to long hours of hard work. Learning to kill and to maim was no chore to me. In my mind I reversed the thought and created out of that which was supposed to be used to destroy. Confinement in the cell was nothing to me. In fantasy so real that it was not a dream, I could again visit my rude hut and again kiss the willing lips of my golden girl. As time went on, I passed from group to group, until I was soon working with those who had been in Cornbray for 10, then 12, and at last 19, 20, and then 21 years. By then there were only a few, as I remember only 9, who had passed all the tests, endured all the trials, and learned all the required sciences. To my amazement, I passed from the class of initiate candidate to the class of Ubate. Within a year I passed from Ubate to Bard. As a bard, I could have been freed to roam the countryside as the other bards did, telling the story of the King of Glory and his 12 Knights of the Round Table of Eternity. I chose to stay and threw all my energy and will into preparing for the last step in the training, the dreadful and sometimes deadly initiation into the class of Druids. One morning after our quarterly initiation ceremonies at the winter solstice, I was waked at low noon, and with 8 others sent on a run into the night down from Cornbray onto the Salisbury plains toward the distant and mighty Cairngorm. Cairngorm! Could even the most gifted make clear what that name and that place has meant in the development of mankind and the initiate man? Could tongue but tell the importance and the antiquity of the symbols and the instruction there, all men would fall upon their knees. Cairngorm, the great temple of the ancient Druids, lay before us, woven about by a veil of mist, yet shining in the first rays of the sun. The temple itself was made of 2 concentric circles formed of upright stones of gigantic size, rising up to 4 or 5 times the height of a man. These enormous stones were connected by cross stones, built, it was said, by mortise stones so carefully selected and fitted that the sound of stonemason's axe or builder's hammer was never heard in the region of the great temple. The outer circle was 33 royal Egyptian cubits in diameter. It was made of 60 giant stones, 30 upright and 30 impost. The inner circle was 30 royal Egyptian cubits in diameter and was made of 40 gigantic stones. Within these 2 circles was the Archdruid's sanctuary. It was made of 2 concentric ovals. The oval shape, or egg-like shape of the sanctuary, was but one of the many symbols which I was to find served instead of words for the purpose of teaching the ancient secrets of the Druids. The outer egg-shaped stones numbered 10, and the inner oval was made of 19 stones. Within this symbol, so carefully designed to tell the world its full meaning, was an altar formed in the shape of a perfect cube. Within that place were enough symbols to occupy a student's meditation for a year. Cairgowr, or as a few Britannans called it, Stonehenge, was open to the air, for the Druids considered it the place of God. They said that God was too great to be encompassed by roofs and floors, or worshipped in any room that was not open to the sun. Between the circles and sets of stones there was a greensward. Surrounding the entire temple was an enormous embankment, beyond which there was a deep ditch. It was said that both were made without any tools stronger than a green reed, and that all earth was moved in hands of love. It was said also that the dozens of underground rooms which lay to the north end of the mighty temple were dug with loving fingers and with gentle and yielding reeds. We were all halted by the chief druid on a path which led directly into the gateway between the gigantic stones. Looking down that avenue, I saw something that was to puzzle me much, almost caused me to fail my final examination, and at last be most significant to my life. Near the entranceway was a single stone, slender and straight, standing upright on the earth. Beyond it, inside the inner circle, was another similar but much larger stone, towering in its loneliness among the other stones that served part of a team purpose of forming a wall. I wondered why these 2 stones were placed so conspicuously and so uselessly in the great temple. When the drummer came near, I whispered, "Sir, looking down this pathway, you see 2 stones set apart and apparently useless. What is their purpose and what are they called?" "No one knows, boy. They are called Phallus 1 and Phallus 2, but their use and their meaning is not known to any man." "Silence!" I fell silent, but I pondered in my heart. Fleetingly, I thought of my wonderful father and how he taught me by use of curiosity, and also of his insistence that there were 3 ways of virgin birth. But we were soon very busy, and the thought faded from my mind. Hundreds of groups of candidates were arriving from all over the land. Within a space of half a sunrise, the plains about the deep, wide ditch were dotted with the colorful robes of chief druids and the brown robes of the candidates. Each of the many oaks seemed to have sprouted brown-robed men around its mighty trunk. Even as the sun was a finger's width above the eastern plain, there was a sudden stir among the men, and a sigh went up. The arch-druid and his train of druid priests and followers came slowly down the broad aisle, flowing like gaily colored water around the far lone stone, then past the guardian stone and across the bridge to the moat-like ditch. In that train of men subservient to the will of the arch-druid were kings, princes, potentates, and masters of commerce and trade. Each man moved, however, with the calm dignity and strong grace belonging to his station. At last the procession fanned out into the plain, forming a veritable rainbow, but a beautiful rainbow that was soon to become menacing and terrible. At a signal, all of us were ordered to move toward the druid priests, and did so eagerly. But as we approached the rainbow of priests, gleaming swords leaped into their hands, and we were stopped by a network of sharp and deadly blades thrust at our breasts. The voice of my uncle came from the arch-druid, echoed across the plain in commanding and powerful tones. "Abandon hope, all who enter here, for the death of man awaits you." Many of the candidates were startled, but none fell back. A line of priests came forward then, bearing in golden bowls bloody-looking sticks. "Open your mouths," commanded the mighty voice, "and take this wormwood and gall. Then you will know what your initiation is to be like." Quickly the many priests tossed into the open mouths the crimson sticks. I was assailed by the horrible taste of wormwood and the bitterness of gall. For a second it seemed too repulsive to bear, then to my amazement the bad taste faded away, and my mouth was filled with the sweet taste of apple blossom honey and sweet horehound. If admitted through the guardian blades, you will advance to the bridge, and there you will kneel and offer your tongues to be cut out. Within these sacred stones, words are not as important as symbols. Look well to each symbol, each stone, for eventually you who live must pass the final examination, and in it you must explain every symbol and every stone. One by one we knelt, extended our tongue, and a symbol stroke was made with a blade that nicked the skin. From that time on we were forbidden to speak inside the sacred area of Stonehenge. However, when we went to wormwood and the bitterness of gall, for a second it seemed too repulsive to bear, then to my amazement the bad taste faded away and my mouth was filled with the sweet taste of apple blossom honey and sweet horehound. If admitted through the guardian blades, you will advance to the bridge, and there you will kneel and offer your tongues to be cut out. Within these sacred stones, words are not as important as symbols. Look well to each symbol, each stone, for eventually you who live must pass the final examination, and in it you must explain every symbol and every stone. One by one we knelt, extended our tongue, and a symbol stroke was made with a blade that nicked the skin. From that time on we were forbidden to speak inside the sacred area of Stonehenge. However, when we went to our underground quarters north of the mighty temple, we were instructed in words concerning the mystical symbols and the meaning of each stone. But this was much later. The first moments of Karagar were almost as overwhelming as were the final moments of the dreadful and deadly final examination. As we approached the stone called Phallus 1, each candidate was handed a small glane probably no bigger than half a thumb, but very trim and strangely iridescent. As I looked at mine, I wondered that it should be handed to me in the very shadow of the first of the unexplained stones. I stood in the awful majesty of that great temple and tried to understand the weighty questions that echoed in my brain to take into the unknown future answers for my dreaded final examination. But I was not to have time or opportunity. We were soon moved onward toward the second and larger of the unexplained stones, crossing the greensward in bare feet. As each man received his glane, a mighty voice thundered, "Put off your shoes, this is holy ground!" Barefooted, we were then taken 7 times around the outer circle and were shown by signs that we hungered for 3 drops from the mighty cauldron of the Druids, for those 3 drops brought great happiness, the ability to tell the future and the fortunes of men, and an understanding of how man might become immortal while still in the flesh. For it was around the everlasting soul of man and the reincarnation of the spirit into the flesh that their instruction was based. They taught that the world was saved from destruction because the nameless mediator, the Son of God, took the part of man and hid his godly self in the flesh of man. They taught that all men could know this God self by inward contemplation and pure faith. An apparently unrelated offshoot of their belief in reincarnation caused me to think much and to ponder deeply. It was their contention that a great man, a hero, could come back from the world of pure spirit and occupy any form whatsoever. A song was sung, in the usual triad so popular with their bards, of the Prince of Powys, one Owen Saviliowi. It said, in metric way, that Owen had appeared in the form of a vibrating shield, a lion before the chief with mighty wings, as a terrible spear, as a bright sword spreading fame in conflict, in the form of a dragon, banner before the sovereign of Britannin, and in the form of a daring wolf. To most of the initiates, the meaning was found in the symbology of the daring wolf. At all initiations, there were men in white ceremonial robes who wore red jewels in their headdresses. These were called the terrible wolves, who were supposed to kill the candidate who quailed or quit. I pondered in my heart upon a deeper meaning, a meaning more important to mankind. It was becoming clear to me that there were many levels of their instruction, and Owen appeared in 6 forms other than his own flesh self. Besides, Owen was but a word whose true meaning was bright self or perfected self. We were taught that no man was truly separate from the divinity. All upon the earth were one in the spirit, merely separate in the physical. They, banner before the sovereign of Britannin, and in the form of a daring wolf. To most of the initiates, the meaning was found in the symbology of the daring wolf. At all initiations, there were men in white ceremonial robes who wore red jewels in their headdresses. These were called the terrible wolves, who were supposed to kill the candidate who quailed or quit. I pondered in my heart upon a deeper meaning, a meaning more important to mankind. It was becoming clear to me that there were many levels of their instruction, and Owen appeared in 6 forms other than his own flesh self. Besides, Owen was but a word whose true meaning was bright self or perfected self. We were taught that no man was truly separate from the divinity. All upon the earth were one in the spirit, merely separate in the physical. They also taught that the world had already been destroyed by flood, and was, unless man perfected himself, to be destroyed by fire in spite of the mediator, the Son of God, and all he could do to save the world. They believed that each individual's soul continued after the death of the flesh and had to face the throne of judgment for all his earthly deeds. They taught also that time was but an infinitesimal fragment of eternity caught in the mind of man, and that there had been and was to be an endless succession or continuing chain of worlds, a continuous creation and destruction of all things physical. The place of punishment for wickedness was a quagmire of never-ending frost, filled with stinging insects and deadly snakes. I adored their teachings regarding truth. They constantly struggled to make each man realize his divine responsibility to the absolute truth, to duty, to love. We were taught that we should more readily give up our lives than fail in duty, in love, or in our adherence to the absolute truth. This, we were taught, was not limited to the time of initiation, but to all transactions of life in every situation. In my heart of hearts, I knew that this teaching was more beautiful and far more complete than the historical religious teachings of the Jews. If the teaching and practice of the Druidic Brotherhood was less than that of the Essenes, it was less only in the practice of love and exchange of affection. The Essenes were no deeper in the worship of the divine. They were more concerned with the group. The Druids created contest and strife, and they caused men to be isolated one from another. But they tried to make of each man a powerhouse, an independent and mighty man, able to walk alone into the thickest battle of either physical, mental, or spiritual enemies. They gave no quarter, they asked no quarter in any contest. Death itself could not shake them in their duty. Withal, they lacked, to my mind, the beauty and the tenderness of brotherly love. Eubates and bards were supposed to be able to foretell the future and exercise charms, spells, and provide entertainments. The Druid was called upon to practice advanced skills in the interest of the state. Neither war, peace, not any state decision was made against the wisdom of the Druids. The lives of kings and princes lay in the power of the Archdruid and his council. Thus it was that the states of all Gaul and Britannin, Wales and Northumberland supported the ritual and the training of Druids, for they wanted only the most highly developed performing within their courts. The dreadful final examination was designed to screen out the faulty and the frail. The course of Druidic instruction was based upon symbols and signs, without the use of audible language. In the final examination, we had to be able to give back what we had learned with unerring accuracy, without fail. We could choose any subject in the arts, the sciences, the laws, or the procedures of the Druids. Once we had chosen, we had to be able to answer all questions and then explain everything within the area of our choice to at least 3 levels of understanding. Failure could mean dismissal. Dismissal meant that you were turned loose without friends in a hostile land, for no man would befriend or help you. Failure was worse than death. Therefore, many men continued to study for years. I could not. After a little more than a year, we were segregated into advanced students and candidates for the final examination, and I was placed in the latter group. When asked what category I would choose for my final examination, I heard myself say, "The sacred symbols of the Druids, of course." "Can you explain each symbol to 3 levels without fail?" One of the candidates whispered when we sat at food. When I did not answer, he added, "It will be bad enough to be set adrift in a coracle upon the sea, but how can anyone explain Phallus 1 and Phallus 2 when even the chief Druids say the meaning is lost to history?" "Perhaps I will not be asked about them," I said. And my heart was heavy with my rash choice. But it was part of the discipline of the Druids that I was bound in duty to attempt this impossible task. Perhaps I will not be asked about them, I said, and my heart was heavy with my rash choice. But it was part of the discipline of the Druids that no man could change his pledged word. I was bound in duty to attempt this impossible task. The news was whispered from cell to cell in our underground chambers, and soon it was known in all Britannia that Jeshua of Nazar, in 4 years of study, would try to pass examinations which most men required 21 years to master, and that he had chosen the sacred symbols of the Druids for his dissertation. Weeks before my examination, caravans began to arrive from all lands, and one came in the most colorful feather robes. I was told that these were the jaguar priests of a brotherhood colony upon a far continent, and that they were called Caribs after the sea near which they lived. The morning of my examination was clear and cold. The assembled visitors waited a little impatiently while I made the ceremonial walk from east to west by way of the south, 7 times around the inner circle. At last I walked toward the archdruid, who was Joseph of Arimathea, and knelt and handed to his assistant my golden sword. If I passed the test, it would be returned, and I would wear it in the physical trials which were to follow. But if I failed my examination, it would never be returned. Or, if it was the order of the Druidic Council, it would be buried to the hilt in my heart. To such things did one bind himself in taking the oath of initiation of the Druids. Jeshua of Nazar, you understand that you must answer all questions to the full satisfaction of every Druid. And on 3 levels of understanding? I do. You certify to all assembled that you have chosen for your dissertation the sacred symbols of the Druids? I do. First question, masters? The first question came from one of the castrati Druids who personally destroyed their manhood in order to become more sensitive to the powers of the divine. Explain the glane. The glane is the physical symbol of the goddess Ceridwen, keeper of duty and truth. It is handed to the candidate as a token of his readiness to begin work on the Druidic degree and is, therefore, the symbol of mental and physical readiness and truth. But a grain of sand might have these symbols, and there would be no need for the work of making an iridescent glass boat representing great care, much preparation, and exacting skills. In this lies the 3rd level of understanding. This easily crushed but brilliant glane is in truth the symbol of the eternal spirit, the soul of man. When it is handed to the candidate, it represents the moment of birth, when the soul parts from the Supreme, imparting to man the living flame of life. I would have gone further, but there was an angry murmuring among some of the Druids from Egypt. After a while they were quieted, and a Caribe, a jaguar priest, asked, "What is the true meaning of spica, the ear of corn?" It consists of many grains, representing abundance or prosperity. It is grown of the earth, representing the fructifying of the earth forces for the use of man. In the spiritual sense, it is the growing of the stalk that is important as a symbol, and the ear merely represents the entire process. As the plant unfolds, it sends forth its leaves and its tassels. Even as man unfolds spiritually, he sends forth healing power and the silken blessing of love. Explain the symbol of the straw, a distant Druid commanded. The straw is the symbol of agreement between men. The breaking of the straw is the symbol of the breaking of an agreement. Straw itself molds into many shapes and forms. When formed into a dart, it is said to have the ability to destroy wild beasts. The true spiritual symbol is found from this. The thought of man is like many straws in the wind. When it is fashioned into a single form, it has surpassing power. Especially it is able to subdue and destroy the wild beast, that is, untamed and undisciplined man. Thought can be as powerful as the dart represented by the straw, or it can be as flimsy as the breakable straw. What is the meaning of the rainbow symbol? The rainbow is a symbol of protection because it is said to be the promise of the divine never again to destroy the world with water. The rainbow is also said to be the belt of the successful candidate, protecting him from all evils. This is merely the symbol of the many-colored dresses of the Druids in which each man finds personal safety. The spiritual meaning is this: there is a radiant being within each and every man, a rainbow of great brilliance, and it, somehow, just how I do not yet know, can bring him safety and protection from all things. Even as I finished talking, an angry murmur came from the Egyptian druids, and one even drew his sword and would have come toward me, but was seized by the jaguar priests and thrown to the ground. His headdress was knocked away, and as he rose, struggling against the cherubs, I recognized the fury and contempt on the face of Nicodemo. His distorted face was like the face of death. For a vote against me could come from any chief druid, and he wore the colors of a master priest. When at last he was quieted and placed back with his group, I felt the pounding of my heart in my throat, and a strange fear was crawling snake-like up my cold spine. The next question had to be repeated. I heard it, but my mind was too much in turmoil to register its meaning. I fought to control the mind within me, to fashion the straws of my own passion-tossed thoughts into a cutting sword. The symbol of the wheel, what is its meaning? Sir, I am sorry that you had to repeat your question. The symbol of the wheel is based upon the astronomical cycles and represents the precession of the equinoctial point. On a higher level, it represents the cyclic returning of the earths of time, that is, the rebirth time after time of the world out of sleeping matter. However, this is not its highest meaning. It also represents the rotation of the cross, upon which, time after time, man must crucify his physical self in order that the spiritual self may find its full release. I was breathing hard, knowing that I was not doing a good job with my answer the distraction had thrown me. Out of rhythm with the crowd and out of contact with my own inner self, I was stumbling in my words, halting in my decisions. But the answer was not challenged, and I waited with my breath coming sharp and hard. I had expected severe questioning, but I was not prepared for this open hostility, not against my answers, it seemed, but against me as a person. I was confused. I was worried. I was in great danger from an unknown cause. Explain the symbolism of the reed. The reed is a symbol within a symbol. It is said to be a symbol of deceitfulness because it bows before the wind from any direction and because it hides the stealthy and deadly water snake. By reverse thinking, it is also the symbol of patience and persistence against any adversity because it rebounds from any. Wind or storm. On the spiritual level, it represents the eternal contact between the Supreme and man, the ever-pliable cord of love that links man to his God. What say you of the symbol of the oak tree? The majestic oak is the symbol and the visible representation of the deity. It is also said to be the place where the Supreme resides. Yet a higher level of meaning comes from the belief that the largest and most centrally located oak should be formed into a cross by cutting away the unneeded branches. The oak cross is considered most important and most holy. The cross is more important as a symbol than is the tree itself. The cross thus made is a living cross, the residence of the Supreme. It is the symbol of the eternal sacrifice. The oak cross becomes the symbol of the Supreme, or the mediator Son of God, and of the force of the eternal Mother, the earth. It is the symbol of the sacred Trinity, toward which man struggles with much sacrifice, and in which he may at last have eternal salvation. Then what is left for the symbol of the mistletoe, the all-heal? It was the rasping voice of Skakus, and it seemed to come from within the hood of one of the Egyptian chief druids. Sir, all-heal is the symbol of the perfect medicine of high esteem, said never to fail as a remedy for disease, in counteracting poison, or in preventing sterility. On a broader basis, it is the symbol of protection against all dangers and difficulties, the grand preserver against all evils, moral and physical. Its spiritual meaning can be understood only if you consider the ritual by which it is collected. The tola is purified by many cleansing baths, by fasting and by rituals, and he is also purified by means of the tolman. 2 snow-white bulls who have never been secured by the horns are made ready for the sacrifice. A golden scythe is forged of newly mined metal and made sharp without the touch of common earth. Then the tola is dressed in a white robe with a red tiara. Barefoot, purified by many cleansing baths, by fasting and by rituals, and he is also purified by means of the tolman. 2 snow-white bulls who have never been secured by the two snow-white bulls who have never been secured by the horns are made ready for the 2 snow-white bulls who have never been secured by the horns are made ready for the sacrifice. purified by many cleansing baths, by fasting and by rituals, and he is also purified by means of the tolman. 2 snow-white bulls who have never been secured by the horns are made ready for the sacrifice. A golden scythe is forged of newly mined metal and made sharp without the touch of common earth. Then the tola is dressed in a white robe with a red tiara. Barefooted he climbs the oak, and holding the scythe in his awkward hand must cut free the all-heel with a single stroke and catch it in his new-spun sagas, so that it is never touched with human hands. The bullocks are then sacrificed amidst rejoicing. The angry murmurs rose to where I could not speak until they were stilled. Spiritually, then, the all-heel is the divine minister which comes from the oak tree, the abode of the Supreme. It is therefore the symbol of the spiritual Son of God, of the supreme all-healer of man's ills and man's corruption. But his supreme all-healer is acquired by man only by great and careful preparation, by careful and practiced disciplines, and by the use of the tolman, or sacred rock of faith. The symbolism of the white bulls completes this. The bull represents the sexual and physical vitality of man. A white bull represents these vitalities purified. A white bull, represented as never to have been tied by the horns, merely symbolizes the fact that man has learned to control and purify his own physical passions and is willing to sacrifice them to receive the supreme all-healer into his breast. The symbols are all now one. The mistletoe is the symbol of the Son of God, made manifest in the breast of every man by discipline, sacrifice, and purity. Mistletoe is the symbol of spiritual and physical immortality acquired by man through worship and devotion. Pandemonium broke loose and groups began to struggle with other groups. One of the Egyptians ran toward me but was tripped by a Carib, and they fell to blows and then to drawn swords. The clang of metal was great as more and more began to fight. The voices were heated and harsh, and the place seemed filled with hatreds, with strife. It was mid-morning before the dissension and the argument was stilled, and I was ordered to continue with my examination. "Can you explain the beehive as a symbol?" "Yes, sir. The beehive is but a cube with the sign of activity. The cube symbolizes perfection, truth, and also the inviolable and sacred inner self of man. The beehive represents the collection of many sacred selves within the confines of perfect truth. It is said to represent the Druids. This is true, but not, as some may think, on the physical level only. It also represents all of the perfected souls of all time. The beehive is the symbol of the masters of the ages, the teachers of man, the source of all knowledge. The Druids themselves become merely a symbol of this higher order. Must we listen to him demean the holy Druids? It was the voice of James of Bruton. "I say, kill him now, and cleanse the name of our order." There was much growling and much argument before I was ordered to continue, but with due respect to the Druids. "Proceed now to the symbol of the chain," my uncle commanded. The chain is a hidden symbol, too. It appears to be the symbol of the candidate's willingness to accept confinement and restriction and endure the rigors of preparation and initiation. But it is not merely a symbol of patience, fortitude, and perseverance. Each link in the chain represents a perfected life, a master raised above the human level. The chain circled about to link to itself represents the binding of all masters of all time into a unity or enduring truth, an order above the physical. "Would you carve an order above the sacred Druids?" It was the harsh and angry voice of Skakus, who stood to his feet with sword half drawn. Before I could answer, my uncle's voice stopped me, and he sounded quite angry with me. "Jeshua of Nazar, you have been warned not to demean this supreme and sacred order of Druids. Watch your tongue if you wish to live." I bit my trembling lips and stood with bowed head, but I could not answer except in truth as I saw it. Knowing that my answer might bring the wrath of the Druids upon me, I still could answer only to the truth I saw. "It is a higher order than the Druids, sir." Half of the Druids were now against me, and they were only partly restrained as they shoved and battled against my defenders until I was surrounded by a threatening ring of swords. But at last order was restored, though with much difficulty, and the highest jaguar priest spoke to the group. "Brothers, we must make allowances for this boy's extreme youth. Like you, I am much disturbed by one who can take of our goods and our substances and yet feel no loyalty to our druidic order. I am disturbed by one who knows that the Druids have the best and greatest teachings of all eternity, yet dares to say that there are higher orders. Perhaps, however, he does not understand the treason within his mind that makes him say such things. Let me then ask him a question concerning a symbol which we all know to be purely of the Druids. Let him guard his answer. What say you then about the symbol of the serpent entwined around the world? Sir, such a symbol worn as an amulet is said to gain favor and to protect the wearer against mental distress. But it is in truth a serpent entwined around the egg. The secret druidic meaning is that this symbol signifies the care which the serpent of the ages, that is, the supreme being, gives to the Druids who worship him. But, boy, the Carabé said, watch your tongue that you do not demean the Druids. Sir, if I demean the Druids, it must be sorry indeed that they are so easily demeaned. For I say to you, no order is higher than truth, and I am sworn to tell truth to the limit of my knowledge and belief. The serpent represents the vitality of man raised to the spiritual level of God. It is the sign of man made like unto God. The egg is the symbol of the ever-fresh source of man, the body or physical self. Together, they have a meaning even higher, for they symbolize the protection of the ever-abundant egg or the physical by the ever-wise spirit of the everlasting God, showing that the physical is the source of all power, the fountain of godhood, the temple of the ever-living God. The symbol, in full truth, is not limited to the Druids, but concerns all men of all races, everywhere in the world. Within each man is divinity, not within Druids alone. The Carib fell back in astonishment, and his jaguar priests rose with an angry shout. But at last he calmed them and whispered, "Quiet, brothers. He will be in the tomb for 3 days before being set loose upon the sea in the coracle. We will stealthily weaken the skins of his boat, and let nature dispose of his hateful mind." Skakus was on his feet, shouting, and was at last recognized by the arch-druid, my uncle, who seemed little pleased with me indeed. My question is this simple and direct, and you must answer that which no man knows. What is the meaning of the symbols of the useless stones, Phallus 1 and Phallus 2? There was happy laughter among the Druids, and someone said, "Ah, now we have him. No man can answer that. No answer is known. Ha!" I stood with head bowed, the very weight of the failure already upon me. "Well, boy, can't you answer?" Skakus taunted. "According to the Druid tradition, there is no answer the Druids have. The symbol of the ever-fresh source of man, the body or physical self. Together, they have a meaning even higher, for they symbolize the protection of the ever-abundant egg or the physical by the ever-wise spirit of the everlasting God, showing that the physical is the source of all power, the fountain of godhood, the temple of the ever-living God. The symbol, in full truth, is not limited to the Druids, but concerns all men of all races, everywhere in the world. Within each man is divinity, not within Druids alone." The Carib fell back in astonishment, and his jaguar priests rose with an angry shout. But at last he calmed them and whispered, "Quiet, brothers. He will be in the tomb for 3 days before being set loose upon the sea in the coracle. We will stealthily weaken the skins of his boat, and let nature dispose of his hateful mind." Skakus was on his feet, shouting, and was at last recognized by the arch-druid, my uncle, who seemed little pleased with me indeed. My question is this simple and direct, and you must answer that which no man knows. What is the meaning of the symbols of the useless stones, Phallus 1 and Phallus 2? There was happy laughter among the Druids, and someone said, "Ah, now we have him. No man can answer that. No answer is known. Ha!" I stood with head bowed, the very weight of the failure already upon me. "Well, boy, can't you answer?" Skakus taunted. "According to the Druid tradition, there is no answer the Druids have. Never caused me to believe there is an answer. But I have pondered much upon the apparently useless stones, and much upon the excellence of the training of the Druids. It seems such a waste of effort to place such singular stones in such conspicuous places unless they have a very important meaning. Sarcastically, Skakus cut in. Boy, are you trying to repair your boat when already at sea? Sir, if my boat must sink, let it be. This I must say. I believe the Druids do not know the meaning of those two stones. I believe that there is a race that does, a brotherhood that not only knows but teaches an important and eternal principle by those stones. Oh, so the Druids are not as great. Sir, will you be silent? I say there is a brotherhood who knows the meaning of those two stones, but I do not say it is a greater brotherhood than the Druids. I do not know. I have thought much and concluded that they must be Egyptian in origin. Why? Karagar is built on the basis of Egyptian royal cubits. Blood Spring, it is said, is built to the dimensions of the royal chamber, using the royal cubit as the base of measurement. Look you, sir, down into the giant ditch. Even there at the bottom of a ditch dug by reeds and loving hands is a greensward which is 105 sandal lengths across, that is to say, 34 royal Egyptian cubits. Even within the sanctuary of this great temple is an altar of perfect cube, and it measures 1 royal Egyptian cubit, and not a hair's breadth more. Answer the question, boy. What is the symbol of the stones? The command or the question was flung at me from hundreds of voices until the shouting echoed from the distant oak grove, and I stood helpless before an angry mob in whose hands my life had been placed. At last the shouting was quelled, and I could not help but answer. I do not know the meaning of the two stones, but if I live, I shall someday find out. Kill him! Kill him! Skakus yelled, and charged at me with drawn blade. A Carib stepped in front of him, and a moment later I found myself surrounded by Druids who led me away. A few minutes later I was in the stone crypt known as the tomb. It was no larger than an ordinary stone coffin. I could barely lie straight and could not sit up. I was literally laid into the tomb as one dead. My guides admonished me to think carefully upon my life and my future if I lived, for I would be set adrift on the northern sea on the 29th of April to live or die by the will of God. Perhaps they suggested I would prefer to drown rather than to face the punishment of angry Druids. With this dire thought they left me, closing the tomb with a large slab of stone. I was weary beyond speaking and collapsed gratefully upon the firm stone. Surely for a moment I lost consciousness in the upsweeping waves of utter fatigue. Then I lay in the absolute darkness, letting my mind drift to my home, to my interest in healing, to my quest for the White Brotherhood and the Order of Melchizedek, and I could not feel that all these years had been wasted. Why I had become so unpopular with the Druids I did not know, and I could not explain, no matter how hard I pondered upon the possible reasons. Then a golden light began to glimmer in the darkness until the beauty of the glorious golden girl was before me. As I approached to kiss her willing lips, she came toward me, but I was pulled backward with a compelling force. No matter how she hurried toward me, I was pulled away even faster. I cried aloud and broke out of my reverie to find that I was sweating and shivering. I forced my mind to think upon the ordeal before me, but I knew, no matter what the punishment, I would never be sorry for having told the complete truth as I saw it. On the third day, the time seemed very short to me. The stone was rolled away from my tomb, and I was told to come forth from the dead. I was then hurried to the sea and set. Adrift at midnight upon the treacherous waves, the sea tossed and pounded the small, skin-covered boat. I found that it was not as violent as in a scull in a windy sea. Battered and bruised from the beating upon the black waves, I saw at daybreak that I was but a few hundred yards from the headlands. Before sunrise, I had managed to guide the coracle to the beach. I saw the Druids there waiting for me. I knew that I had just enacted the key role in an endless drama. I had been made dead, buried, and resurrected on the third day. Then, as the newborn, I had become the infant in the basket, and had been forced to trust the divine with my new life by being set adrift upon the treacherous sea. At last I was lifted from the water by the hands of many cheering Druids and carried back to food and to rest, and to magnificent festivities of the May Day. But in my heart I pondered, what was the greater meaning behind this ancient play of being dead, buried, reborn, entrusted to fate, redeemed, and at last allowed to stand as conqueror of time and fate before those happy Druids who now addressed me as thrice-born Jeshua of Nazar? What was the deeper mystery? What was the third meaning? Why could I not separate from my mind the two useless stones and the vision of the golden girl? What had these to do with my wonderful father? What had all this to do with the White Brotherhood and the Order of Melchizedek? Yet, even as I pondered thus, another channel of my heart and mind asked an even more urgent question: would I ever again see and truly kiss the golden girl?